Okay. This is a little, I got, I said a few basic tips in a short story, but I've actually got more than one story on this thing. And this right here was a thing that Ernie Gazzo, Victor Transmission, and Wayne Solana had posted in Motor Age, the first part of it, but I added other stuff to the rest part. So whenever you got some kind of an issue that you're trying to deal with, basically it's the same thing. You know, you get a grip on what the symptom is. What is it we're trying to fix? You know, like we were dealing with that noise we were looking for out there, and we were, I'd had him drive it to see what he heard, and I didn't really see anything, even when we got in there with a stethoscope and all, but I was telling him the person that's not gonna be working on it and the person that's not gonna be paying for it can always hear stuff that needs to be fixed. You know what I'm saying? When you check the fluid, look for obvious problems, damage, leaks, and check for diagnostic trouble codes. And this particular story here is about a 2002 Tacoma with an intermittent, no reverse, takes off in second gear, and it won't shift to fourth gear. This is the transmission issue here. Intermittently storage code P0755 for S2 solenoid performance, and shifts to solenoid. Now you gotta realize that some transmissions have got one or two solenoids, some got several, and all that. And whenever the first time I got into a bunch of shift solenoid issues was in some of the early 90s, the Asian transmissions. And you would think that whenever shift solenoid 1 kicks in, you shift to second gear, and when shift solenoid 2 kicks in, that ain't the way it is. They're all over the map. They're just liable to be any kind of way. One way or another, when you're pulling codes and you see a P07 series code, that's a transmission code. The code was recorded and they cleared it, and it didn't return even when this problem occurred during the road test. So this was sort of an iffy code that didn't always happen. All right, the S2 solenoid was replaced. That's what the solenoid looks like on that one as far as and it was noticed that the pan was clean. When they pulled the pan off to replace the solenoid, because you had to do that on this one, then you had everything in there was nothing in the pan. Everybody was clean as a whistle. So that means there's no clutches coming apart, no metal parts that are grinding away or anything like that. Got something else. Okay, so I road tested it, but it still had an intermittent, no reverse. It sometimes would start off in second gear in the absence of fourth gear, and it still wasn't fixed. So they put a whole valve body on it that they had. And they did a lot of transmission work in this shop, and they had another valve body they could try, and it had the solenoids on it. And they put the whole valve body on there with different solenoids, and that was still tried. Now these people are struggling. They're trying to get this thing straightened out. They got a code pointing to the S2 shift solenoid. Okay, so at idle and park, neutral, drive, and reverse, the S1 solenoid, which is a violet wire, always showed 12 volts. And I'm basically about my little graphic here. I won't mention this in a later slide, but you might notice that these solenoids here are grounded, and they have a hot wire coming out of the engine controller to them. That's kind of unusual if you're used to the way that domestic engine controllers do, because usually domestic engine controllers will ground the solenoids to activate them, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. But anyway, the S2 solenoid, which is a light green wire, always showed 0 volts at park, neutral, drive, and reverse. So they checked the voltage on the wires for the S1 and S2 solenoid, very high scan data. All right, so when the problem occurred, they noticed there was 2 volts showing on the S2 solenoid's light green wire. They had 2 volts on this wire that shouldn't have been there. Should have been no volts, but they were showing 2 volts. Okay, so they cut the wire just to see what happened there. And as soon as they did that, the reverse engaged immediately and allowed for a first gear takeoff. So they said, cutting that wire made a difference. It caused the thing to start working right. So they said, maybe there's a short to power somewhere. So they ran an overlay, which is they basically cut that wire out and put another wire in there from the solenoid to the ECU connector, which is right here. Well, the same problem remained, the 2 volt phantom voltage showing up there. And see, they're getting into this thing pretty deep. So they determined the computer must have a bad driver, and so they bit the bullet and got a new ECU, and you put it on there and it still wasn't fixed. Can't tell you how many times I've seen that. Yeah. Me and Zach, we've kind of been there lately, haven't we? Okay. All right, so backtracking. Now there was nothing else to do but go back over and check all the grounds until they found this bolt loose, securing a gang of ground wires in the engine compartment at the right front of the engine area. That's an actual photo of the ground that they found loose. There's a whole bunch of wires that goes into that thing. So, NEI, not enough information. instead of TMI, right? See where I'm going with that? They didn't have enough. When the customer was asked about that, they said, oh yeah, I did have work done on that thing, engine work done. I didn't think to tell you that. You see what I'm saying? If they'd have told them somebody worked on the engine and then we have this transmission problem, they'd have gone and looked at the stuff to start with.
Right.
But they didn't get enough information from their customer. They might have saved themselves a lot of time and money with that little bit of information. Somebody else did work on the engine, now the transmission's acted up, they take it to a transmission shop, didn't give them enough information. My buddy Jimmy was over there and he said there was a Power Stroke diesel that they rebuilt the transmission on at a transmission shop over there, you know, down the road from where he works at the Ford dealer. And he says that they brought it over there, they ran out of ideas because it kept acting up and cutting up, and all he did to fix that one was clean the battery terminals. And that was the whole problem with the transmission. Now, I got a couple of quick stories. There was a diesel Dodge. This guy was telling the used car department, he said, I'll buy this Dodge if you can fix this problem where, see, he was test driving, and he noticed when he was driving down the road at road speed, it would hunt in and out of fourth gear. In and out of fourth gear. He could feel it, you know, because you got first, second, third, usually torque converter starts to lock up or, you know, or modulates, and then you go into fourth gear, which is your highest gear, which is your overdrive and gives you your fuel economy. And it was a diesel. All right, and so we were swamped back there in the back. Of course, we had the Jeep franchise, which gave us access to the Mopar diagnostic system, which is a computer that you hook up to the scan tool and you can reflash and all that stuff. But anyway, they took it to the transmission shop. Transmission shop said, put a throttle position sensor on it, and if that doesn't fix it, we'll have to go into the transmission. And so they brought it to me, and I pulled it up on the Mopar diagnostic system, and it says, by the way, there's a reflash available on this for the transmission hunting in and out of fourth gear. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure, I'll go ahead. And I plugged into it and reflashed the engine controller and fixed that problem, or actually the transmission controller. And I fixed the trouble, and they brought me the guy bought the truck, and they brought me a gift certificate to Longhorn for $25, and so I got me a steak that day. And see, it was just a simple little thing, just don't miss anything, check the TSBs, look for anything that you might see that, you know, that's when we go to Identifix, these guys need to be shown Identifix. Where you go to Identifix, sometimes you can find a problem really fast on Identifix because it's like having 1,000 mechanics in a room, and you say, have you ever seen a 2002 Dodge Dakota that gets wet in the floorboard on the right side whenever you run the air conditioner? And about, 40 of them raise their hand and say, yeah, I've seen a bunch of those, and we had to seal around the evaporator drain to take care of that. I mean, see where I'm going with that? I mean, it's just real good stuff. There's another one, 94 Escort. This had a 4EAT, 4-speed electronic automatic transmission. They call it a 4EAT. And the same one that was in the Ford Probe or a similar one. Anyway, that little Escort, the transmission mechanic over there when I worked, well, he had worked, he rebuilt that thing, took it all apart, put it back together with clutches and seals and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember all the symptoms on it because I've slept since then. This was probably in 1995. It was a long time. But what I did was, I said, what we need to do is we need to get this, on the probes, they had a little connector you could plug in, and it had all the little red lights that would light up when the shift solenoids were engaged. And I actually drove good cars and got a pattern for what those lights were supposed to be like. And so I built him a little box so he could hook it up. And it would, when the transmission shift solenoids were energized by the engine controller, it would turn those lights on, and we had them labeled shift solenoid 1, 2, 3, and 4, and all that. Whenever it happened, we determined from that little box I built with the LEDs on it, watching those lights and looking at the pattern as far as the shift solenoid chart, that the engine controller was bad on that one, or the power plant control module. So we put a PCM on that one and fixed it. Now, solenoids are pretty important. Like I said earlier, PX7XX series codes are transmission related, and you got all this right here. These are sensors and solenoids, but you got a 1-2 and a 2-3 and a 3-2 shift solenoid valve assembly and a torque converter, clutch pulse width modulation solenoid valve, which a torque converter doesn't always lock up completely nowadays. It begins to modulate in. It'll go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And sometimes if the friction modifiers are worn out in the fluid, when the torque converter's modulating in, it's starting to chatter a little bit. And have you ever run over those little speed bumps going down to the stop sign? Where you go, it'll feel like that on the Crown Victoria, like hers sometimes. And it'll also surge sometimes because it needs, and one time I was working on a Taurus and I was surging, and I had the service bay diagnostic system portable vehicle analyzer on it, and I noticed the torque converter modulation was going along with the surge, and I just took a chance and I poured a little bit of friction modifier in there because it's got that friction modifier in the fluid, and and it stopped all that. You know, of course, the transmission experts at Ford says, no, don't ever do that. Well, it didn't hurt nothing. You know, like, we're even in trouble. But anyway, I'm not saying you ought to do that, but what I'm saying is I did it that time just to see if that would make a difference, and it fixed it. The friction modifier is what you ordinarily put in limited slip differentials so that they won't go going around the corner because they got little clutches in there in the spring moving. Every automatic transmission's got some kind of pressure control, whether it's mechanical, as in a modulator valve or a throttle valve, or electromagnetic. And most of them will default to high pressure. If it sees there's a problem, if it detects there's a little slippage, it will just say, well, I'm just going to run the pressures all up really high, and then it shifts, bam, it shifts really hard. It's better for it to shift hard, though, than it is for it to shift easy, because if it shifts easy whenever it needs to shift hard, it'll burn the clutch, the linings off those little clutches. It doesn't take long. You notice these clutches have got teeth on the inside, and the plates have got teeth on the outside, and when this piston pinches those together, this becomes all one unit, and it hooks whatever is on the this shaft start become, you got driving members and holding members and all that kind of stuff. Not all transmissions have bands, but they've all got brakes. Some of them, if you see those, some of the plates going into the outside of the transmission housing, like the case, that's actually a brake. Okay, when doing work in the throttle body area, see that cable right there? If you operate the throttle and you see there's a cable hooked to it that stretches out, it's stretching. You operate the throttle and it's pulling that cable out when you open the throttle. That's going to the transmission. Now there's an adjustment on that, but I'm not going to talk about that right now because it ain't too hard to do. But the simple fact is, if you happen to be doing some work in this area on something else and you leave that off, you will burn the transmission up on that vehicle. Because this right here, when that's pulled out, it raises the pressures. You see, and it holds the gears longer and that kind of thing. If that thing comes off of there, or if you see that that's off of there, and it fries the clutches in the transmission, don't be responsible for that. Always make sure that thing's on there securely and put it back on there like it ought to be. That is really important. Domestic transmission solenoids are typically ground actuated. In the computer, you'll have a ground. There'll be power coming in there. And the Asian ones will usually be the other way around. They'll basically have a ground. They'll be hardwired to ground, and the engine controller will send the power in the top. And the hardwired side on domestic transmissions is always hot. Now there's an exception to this on the domestic stuff. The air spring solenoids on the ones that have air springs on these air suspension Fords, they are actually hardwired to ground, and the controller puts power to them, which I thought was really strange. The planetary gears provide the various gear ratios depending on what's held and what is driven. Now this is like a 4L60E. This is a reaction sun shell. And that little thing right there likes to pop off of those. And when it does, it gives you issues with, fourth and reverse, if I remember right. But that reaction sun shell is a very, very common failure in those 4L60E transmissions. Some transmissions have their solenoids in a single pack. This is for a Dodge Stratus. Like, for example, you can go on there and buy this little kit for something like $95 on eBay. And it comes with a solenoid pack, a filter and a gasket, and both speed sensors. For $95, you can do a transmission tune-up on a Dodge Stratus. It doesn't take very long. It's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, these little sensors right here usually cost 30 bucks a piece if you buy them at the parts store, and that's usually 150. And this right here is going to be $20 or something. You get what I'm saying? The only thing you got to buy that's not here's your fluid. So if you wanted to, throw a, into your little, PT Cruiser or your Dodge Stratus, it comes with one of those. That's Board Warner actually made that in the box. That is the 4E4OD4R100 internal solenoids. Now this connector sticks through the transmission case to the outside. It's on the other side. I should have found a picture where it flipped around. You notice there's speed sensors on this, your turbine speed sensor and output shaft speed sensor. Oh, and by the way, Jimmy was working on one day, one of those, and the connector for the output shaft speed sensor and the vehicle speed sensor, I was on a 97 F-150 if I remember right, he accidentally mixed them up. He reversed them, put them on there backwards, and when you drove that car, before you even got to the stop sign, the speedometer was already reading 85 miles an hour. And so he had to come back and, they would plug in either way. They look just alike, This is the 4L60E, like I showed you the gut parts for a minute ago, internal solenoids. And you basically can buy this little tune-up kit for that from eBay too. See, that's pretty neat, you can do all that. Because you took one of those apart and put it back together, didn't you?
I did.
4L50. All right, so this is how that's wired up like that. You got your, PCM is actually controlling all those little solenoids in there inside the transmission. And whenever you see it, you remember when you see a dotted line, that means you're not seeing the whole thing. And when you see a solid line, that means you are seeing the whole thing, So I don't have a solid line on this schematic. Don't worry long about that. Honda Odyssey transmission external solenoids. I will tell you that it's very easy if you're not paying attention to put these solenoids, to plug these in backwards. That's why they have a brown one and a black one. We did a transmission here one time, and the solenoids were put in the wrong holes. And when I went in there and looked at the picture of how it was before, it wasn't working right. And the only thing we had to do was change out them solenoids and plug them in the right way, and everything was fine on that. Okay. Solenoids can be numerous and complicated, like on this 2008 F250 diesel with internal solenoids. See all the solenoids in there? You got solenoid A, B, C, D, E, torque converter clutch, and electronic pressure control. That's giving you your line pressure. And look, pressure versus current, inversely proportional. So if you disconnect that one, that means the pressure is going to go wide open high. If you blow a fuse, it's feeding the solenoids. They want the pressure to go wide open, right? So that you don't burn it up, all right? The APC, they give you, this little chart here actually tells you how many ohms each one of them supposed to have, so you can measure it with a meter, all right? Now, this is a Ford Focus. Won't be a transmission mechanic, can't just wing it. You can look at these pictures and tell that this is a complicated piece of equipment, right quick. See that? That looks like a maze, doesn't it?
Right.
Now, you don't necessarily have to know where all of those go. But whenever you're pulling, you get this gasket right here, and you get a new gasket like it, you better doggone sure hold them gaskets up together and make sure that the holes are all in the same place. Because all it takes is one thing that's a little bit wrong, with the way the gasket's cut. Yeah, you got to make sure. And so there's a little solenoid on that one. And this basically, you'll see a little thing in the shop manual right here that's going to tell you which one is which. Like if you're looking at shift solenoid A for a code, and you don't even know which one of these it is, that's going to be a mess, isn't it? You better get right with that. Okay, and that, like I say, that's what this looks like torn apart laying on the bench. There's two pieces and then little bolts hold it together. When you're taking the valve body off of a transmission too, typically there's some bolts that hold it on and there's some bolts that hold it together. You don't just take out every bolt you see. You're going to look in the book and see which ones are the right ones. Did you have a problem with that one time? Well, I saw you smiling. Okay. Here's your shift solenoid apply chart. You see how useful this is. If you're having problems in a particular gear on this particular transmission, let's say that you basically had a problem in drive first. Solenoid A was off, off, off. These two are on. Shift solenoid D and E are on. And the EPC solenoid, is basically giving you pressure. It's a pulse width modulator. The more current you give it, the more it opens up. Whatever. All right, so you can actually look at which gear range you're having trouble in, and if you go to this chart, let's say that you just drive second, if that one there, if it was like it was off because it was burned out, or the wire was unplugged, or it wasn't working some kind of a way, then basically you're going to be looking at that particular one for an issue. Now I'm going to show you something else here. That's manual first. When you put it manual first, A and B are on, these two are off and that one's on. Now you can actually start tracking that kind of stuff down on that. Now this is a clutch and band application chart, which is similar, but it's actually telling you which clutches and bands are applied in which gear. Like for example, right here in second, let's see. Let's right over and let's look for one right here. If you've got D3 third and D1 first, that's the only one applied. And if these are the only ranges that are giving trouble, the overrunning clutch is the one you're going to be concerned with. That makes sense? You see what I'm saying? If you pay attention to how it's driving and know what you're feeling, you got roller clutches which basically won't let it go but one way, and sometimes they can go bad too. Now look at your low reverse clutch. Your low reverse clutch is applied in park and reverse, and it's also applied in D1 first. So let's say everything was fine except reverse and D1 first. Well, I'd be looking over here, wouldn't you? See what I'm saying? But you gotta know in the transmission where that clutch is. When you're tearing it apart and you're stacking it aside, when you get to this one, this is the one you're gonna pay close attention to. And you're also gonna look at the solenoids. And I'll tell you something else too. If you're rebuilding one, if they'll let you do it, replace the dadgum solenoids, or the solenoid pack. Don't try to use the old ones, because that'll get you in all kinds of trouble. Just go ahead and put new ones in it. It's gonna add about $300 to it on some transmissions or more, but it's a whole lot better to do that instead of having to go back in there again. Now this one right here, they stacked them all together. They want to help you as much as they can. This tells you about the shift solenoids, it tells you about the band or reverse clutch or overrun clutch. All these clutches and the shift solenoids are all on the same chart. Not only that, they're giving you a cutaway of the transmission so they can tell you which one is where. You kind of know where to look at it. And some of them go out of their way, a big way to help. So others will throw you under the bus and won't tell you nothing. That's the end of the slideshow. Okay, somebody tell me something you learned that you didn't know before you came in here.
A lot. It's a lot to take
Yeah. Well, automatic transmissions or something. I have had people that come out of here and did automatic transmissions professionally and like, still doing them and like them, and then they ain't for everybody.
When you were saying, like, if you're rebuilding the transmission, like, if they let you, if the old solenoids aren't giving you trouble, you still replace them anyway?
I would.
Aren't giving you trouble? I
would. I mean, well, you went into the transmission because it's giving trouble anyway. Tell you what happened with one that we were working on. We built a transmission here in a Taurus that transmission was giving trouble. And we tore it apart and had all kinds of stuff burned up in it and everything, right? And so we were trying to just fix it surgically, right? And just do what needed to be done. And so Daniel Kelly went into that thing, him and Webb, probably half a dozen times. It's kind of funny. First time they pulled it out, it took them a day and a half to get the transmission out. The last time they pulled the transmission out, it took them 45 minutes. Because they knew just exactly what they had to do. You see what I'm saying? I mean, if they knew just knew what to take, knew what to jerk out of there, they got it out. They can get it out back out, man, it was lightning speed. But the last thing we did to got that transmission straightened out after they fought it, was we put all new solenoids in it. And that's all it took. You can't see nothing wrong with them, really. You know what I mean? So if you don't throw the solenoid, I'm talking about pressure control, shift solenoid 1, 2, and 3 on that one. After we put those in there, that thing was crisp and perfect and just like it was supposed to be. But all the rest of the parts were put together right, but it didn't work right until we put brand new solenoids in it. So if you did that the first time around, they wouldn't have had to pull it out 4, 5, or 6 times trying to figure out what was going on. You know what I mean? That's what the whole point is. Now, basically, that's why transmission shops usually charge as much as they do. When I was talking to the people over at Transpro about it, Gary and the guy that works with him over there says, that sounds like that C4DE we pulled out about 10 times. Because I mean, every now and then you're going to see one that's going to smack you around. I mean, I don't care how much you know, how good you are, sometimes you're just going to have trouble. I mean, and sometimes the simplest job can turn into a monster. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, listen to him, he's been there. Sometimes what seems like it ought to be, push, pull, snap, click, open and shut case, it's like it all of a sudden turns into a T-Rex and it wants to bite you in the fanny on the way out the door or something.
That's the fun part of it.
Yeah, it is, it really is. And,
That's the part where you learn something.
yeah, and also you got to be tough. This kind of work is not for lazy wimps, is it? No, it's not. You got to be tough, and you got to be strong, and you got to be fast, and you got to be fresh from the fight. Is that what the song said? Okay. All right. That's the end of it.